Summer school time again, guys. You see the logo on the screen, or if you're listening on Apple, I better just tell you who it is. It's Kansas State. Got my man from Go Power Cat, Tim Fitzgerald. Tim, welcome back to the show.
Great to have you with me here. It's kind of weird being the guest and not the host. I don't know what to do.
I- I'm, I'm,
What
I
do I do with my
really,
hands?
I enjoyed last year's. We'll throw them up a little bit. There we go. All right. Last year, Kansas State, just a fantastic story. Champion of the Big 12, went what 10 ball games, a top 10, top 8, power rating.
Yeah,
Didn't seem very fluky. What did you see from Coach Chris Kleiman's team that allowed him to make that kind of jump?
they kind of found their confidence, and this team has found a way, and this will be interesting to see if it translates to this year of going on the road and actually being better. They really go on business trips. And that was really important to them because they lost at home to Tulane. And we thought that was such an awful loss. Then we went on to find out that Tulane is really good. But that also set them on course to what they accomplished during the course of the season. And in a weird way, as much as Adrian Martinez brought to the locker room and the program, um, him getting hurt and getting Will Howard thrown into the mix at quarterback was a revelation for Kansas State. That young man got incredibly better in a season or two and really led K State to some really fun games, including a Big 12 championship victory.
We'll start with the offense, but both the offense and the defense were well balanced units in terms of it wasn't an Iowa situation where one side of the ball is really carrying the other. And I do want to start at quarterback. I liked Will Howard better than Adrian Martinez, at least the upside of him. The staff clearly saw something in Adrian Martinez, though they kind of kept playing him down the stretch. And look, they won the Big 12. So who am
Right.
I to question it? Where are some areas that maybe they see in Will Howard's game that could allow him to get even better? Because clearly the guy has some talent, but like internally, what do they see? Is like, all right, this, and this are ways that he can get better and really take the next step forward.
But what's fascinating about Will Howard's progression is when he was playing younger, and let's keep in mind, he played as a true freshman during the COVID season. So he got thrown into the fire with Deuce Vaughn, and his inabilities got exposed as the season went on, the things he really needed to work on. And then he struggled again, and they kept trying to redshirt him, thinking he needed more time, even though he'd show stuff in practice, but then he'd get into games and not translate. Well, Adrian Martinez gets injured, and they throw Will Howard in, and he just starts making throws that we hadn't seen him make. His arm strength is much better. But the irony is, before that, he was known as kind of a run first guy. He was pretty good with his feet. But he keeps getting bigger and bigger and stronger, and it's enabled him to stand in the pocket and throw the ball all over the field. And I think the coaches actually want to see him marry these two things together. He really didn't show much run ability last year. And if he can add that in, it's going to be really dangerous because this kid's a horse. He's now 6'6", almost 250 pounds of muscle. He just keeps getting bigger. His brother is signed as a offensive lineman, so I don't know what they're doing up there in Pennsylvania with these kids. But Will Howard's a big time leader, and he's just really blossomed into this job.
Running back, they do lose a pretty iconic guy in Deuce Vaughn, one of my favorite players to watch in the sport. They also lose, as you mentioned, at the quarterback position, the running ability of Adrian Martinez, who was the second leading rusher on the ball club. But they got a guy I'm pretty familiar with in Trayshawn Ward, who
Yeah.
is like just great patience, like doesn't have the top end speed, but other than that, like I feel like he should fit in well there. Was he in for spring? And if so, how did he look for them?
He was in for spring, but he was recovering from injury, so he was limited. He was no contact and just kind of learning his way. They really like him, as they do DJ Giddens, who was Deuce Vaughn's backup last year, who was really effective, more of a power back, well, by Kansas State standards. He's over 6 feet, so he's the big running back. Ward's a little guy, but when you follow Deuce Vaughn, you're not as little as he was. So I think those two will marry together into a really nice running package for Kansas State because Giddens showed he can do a lot of stuff, and I'm really fascinated to see Ward in action.
So at receiver, I guess this is one of the areas that on my sheet I have circled as maybe a major question. So you lose Knowles, you lose Warner. Not that those guys caught a ton of balls, but they were the two leading, outside guys with Brooks. I have listed as a slot. Is this an area of concern for this team? If not, like who do you project to step up and maybe fill those roles?
Well, Keegan Johnson comes in from Iowa. They really like him, and a young guy, R.J. Garcia, is coming up through the ranks. And we'll see what they can do together. But whenever you talk about receiving the ball, you got to throw in Ben Sinnott, the tight end, and those two kind of go together as almost like Kelsey and Mahomes with Howard and Sinnott. They're on the same page. It's really fun to watch, and he makes the receivers better. Receiver continues to be an area of concern for this Kansas State football team, just because the depth hasn't always been there. The high end receivers haven't been there, and we'll see if they can piece it together.
Offensive line is the unit that makes this thing go. And I really like watching Kansas State. I feel like they run a lot of different blocking schemes and are able to pull it off. And I have no idea how they practice it sometimes, but everybody's back on this offensive line. Probably the best offensive line in the Big 12. I would think. Like, there's some chance Texas takes another step forward, maybe, right? But
yeah,
entering the season, it's got to be Kansas State. Is there anybody who didn't start last year who's seriously pressing, to start this year?
Well, he started the first game, Taylor Portier. This kid has been injured both seasons, the last 2 seasons with knee injuries. He's got them both out of the way now. So if he can come back and be healthy, and sometimes those knees just need to be rebuilt to play football, and that might be the case with him. He's a really good offensive guard. And if they can get him into the mix, it's going to really make that offensive line even better. But you got Cooper Beebe. This kid decided to come back, even though there was a chance he was going to be drafted in the first 3 rounds. People are talking about him being the best offensive lineman in college football. We'll see about that. But he's really the anchor inside, and he came back to play with his brother, who's an incoming freshman, or he's already here. And when that whole entire offensive line, even the guys that could use their COVID season, announced they were coming back, I think that set K-State's confidence through the roof because they know those guys really lead the way.
Is this year's offense better than last year's offense?
It's hard to say that without Deuce Vaughn in it. I mean, but I think it could be more creative. I mean, it could be do some other things with it. I'm excited to see Colin Klein deal with that, not having Deuce Vaughn. Because sometimes you get a crutch like that, you lean on it too much. If that was possible with Deuce, but I think they have enough weapons to be a really scary offense. And Will Howard can put the ball in tight spaces. He did it over and over last season. And if his receivers go get the ball, they're going to be really effective downfield.
One of the things I like to track during draft season is the stories of these guys who were 2-star recruits or no-star recruits who end up becoming first-round picks or high picks. And one of those guys was Eneduke
Uzama. Yep.
Uzama, excuse me. Did you see it with him as a recruit, like as somebody lives in the area, that he was going to put on that much weight and still be that twitchy?
No. I mean, he was basically a glorified walk-on. They had him down as a blue shirt, which is, a weird thing to start with. The pictures of him as a recruit / incoming freshman are comical.
Yeah.
I mean, they're comical. It does not look like a Division I football player in any way. But so many kids in this region, because particularly in the state of Kansas, they don't let you play as much football year round as other places. So you're multi-sport. They knew he was going to put on weight. Could they project that he'd put on that kind of muscle mass so quickly? I don't think it's possible. It was shocking, his transformation of his body, and the fact, as you mentioned, it only made him faster. I mean, it just made him more powerful. And going in the first round says all you need to know about him. He was incredibly disruptive. He was double teamed constantly, and losing him's a big deal. But now they slide Khalid Duke in, who was injured 2 years ago, open the door for Felix Anudike-Uzomah to get on the field on a regular basis and shine. Last year, they got him back and they moved him to outside linebacker just to get him on the field. It made him a better all-around player, but that's not his position. They put him back at defensive end, and I think he's going to slide right into that playmaking role that King Felix had for Kansas State. But you also got guys like Brendan Mott, who was really effective at defensive end, and Nate Matlack, who was injured most of the last season, played through it, but it impacted him, and he's healthy as of now. I think they're going to be almost better at the rush in spot this season.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was really curious about the potential of this pass rush. Equally curious about how they're going to replace two guys that played an awful lot last year for them along the defensive interior, including Huggins, excuse me.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a lot of guys, Tim, on this roster who are listed at like 285 plus. Like where's the beef, right? To quote the
Yeah.
old Wendy's commercial.
Yeah, exactly. And you just named the guy. Eli Huggins is the guy I think is going to be the hardest to replace. You can talk about Deuce and Felix and Julius Brents at corner all you want, but his importance in the interior of that defensive line, um, you know, it's just can't be overstated. If you go back to the big play in the Big 12 championship against TCU with the goal line stand, it was him that got through and really broke up that play. Daniel Green finished it off. They had a young nose tackle in that got thrown in on that play who did a great job submarining. But boy, their big Samoan, they call him Uso, is going to move into that spot. And the question becomes this: at his size, because he is big, is he able to go enough? Is he able to take enough snaps and not just be that guy that comes in for a few plays? If there's one spot they would still welcome someone through the transfer portal if it popped up before the season, it's nose tackle. If they found the right guy, they would probably take one more person to try to make themselves feel a little bit better, because they really only got three guys there. In the Big 12, you need three, let alone with injuries. So that is a spot of great concern for me going into this season.
Between Moore and Green and Purnell, they're pretty set at linebacker.
Yeah.
It looks like it. Kind of the same question with the offensive line. Is there anybody not in that returning group that we think maybe could burst through and be a real impact guy?
Well, I mean, you just named him, but Daniel Green played all of last season injured. We thought he was going to leave 2 years ago, and he told us after they lost at Texas that he was going to come back and shocked us. We all said goodbye to him after the Sugar Bowl, and then he shocked everyone, including his coaches, when he said, "I'm not satisfied with how I finished this off," and he came back for his COVID season. And I think if Daniel can stay healthy, you're going to see an extremely dominant linebacker. He was a shell of himself last year. And it allowed Austin Moore really to kind of take over some of that, who is about as unconventional looking as a Big 12 linebacker as you could get. He looks like, the frat guy that plays on the lacrosse team. Yeah, it's a fascinating dynamic between these two, because Daniel's a traditional linebacker that can run from sideline to sideline, but he wasn't able to do that last year. And I'm excited for him. He's a great kid. Let's see if he can have a big season.
In the secondary, I have not much of an idea how to slot this. If I didn't read Go Power Cat, I'd have no idea how to slot this. So Josh Hayes, Julius Brents, who I thought was a pretty good ball player. Cheatham is the name I can't pronounce. Mason and Smith are all gone. Like that's basically everybody who played 200 snaps, with the exception of Savage, Parrish, and Payne, are gone. And I know they hit the FCS ranks pretty hard with the transfer portal, which I guess makes sense given where the staff came from. How are you stacking this room up?
Again, another spot that needs to be solidified. But you mentioned two of the guys you mentioned there, Parrish and Payne, were true freshmen last year. And they played either started or played significant minutes against Alabama as true freshmen that were, three-star recruits. So they grew up very fast last year. Kobe Savage is a huge addition. He was probably the best safety on the roster last year before injuring his knee. And he's a dynamic player and a dynamic leader. But boy, they're going to be throwing some young safeties and corners out there, or some unproven ones. But again, the coaches continue to say, we like what we got there. I go back 2 years ago when they had Julius Brents come in from Iowa. He was big, long, and he looked the part, but he wasn't very physical. Boy, by his senior season, he was incredibly physical. So this is one of those situations where I kind of trust the coaching staff, because they've created guys on that back end of the defense to become playmakers their entire time at Kansas State. And when they say we got the guys, I kind of trust them, but I am worried about safety depth. No doubt about that.
Yeah, I remember seeing Brent's at a 7-on in Miami, and you sign with Iowa. I was like, okay, yeah, like that's going to work. Iowa does a great job with defensive backs. And when he left, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then there's not a lot of guys, but then obviously Kansas State did a great job of them. One of the fun things I think about summer school is getting the real insight. And so Green and Savage and Duke as guys who are returners, but your power ratings out there may not reflect their potential upside of like a full healthy year, right? Or 2 years removed from surgery in some cases. Like there's some big names here to replace, but if they do manage to to hold serve and not backslide on defense, it's probably because those guys unlocked a level that maybe 2 years ago suggested they could with the injury, right? I think.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
the thing with Kansas State and programs like that aren't able to recruit at the highest levels, the key for these teams, and it's always been true for K-State, if you get injuries, you kind of have a drop off. You really do. You get that maybe the top two lines ready to go, but if you get down into that third player, you're probably bringing in a 3-star recruit who needed to physically develop, not a 4 or 5-star guy that is the biggest kid in his high school. I mean, it's just the way it works at Kansas State. So staying healthy is a premium, and guys like Khalid Duke now getting a chance to kind of step to the forefront again, because going into that 21 season, we thought he was going to be the man, and then he goes down with an injury, and and it just was a long road back. But I think he's going to really thrive this season.
Tim, at place kicker, is it Chris Tennant or because I know like Zentner also kicked the ball some last year, and I don't watch enough Kansas State to remember exactly what happened with the kickers, but what's your kicker situation like this year?
Tennant's a strong-legged kid who got the yips.
Okay.
And they went to the punter. They brought him in, and he did a great job. I don't know where they're at with place kicker. They got some freshmen coming in. They got some young guys. Again, that's another position because I don't think any of us feel like Chris Tennant is over his yips. But they had Ty Zentner, and we saw how cool Ty Zentner was coming on the Big 12 championship, smiling, laughing as he ran on the field. And they're going to miss that ice water because he had that running through his veins, punting the ball or kicking the ball. And he might have played the biggest role of anyone in stabilizing Kansas State. Because if you go back to the loss at TCU, it was Chris Tennant missing a field goal that was very makeable. That kind of turned the tide in that game and soured everything as TCU came back from a deficit. So getting that locked down, they're just in the process now of hiring a new special teams coordinator. And making sure they're kicking and punting, which is always a point of pride and importance at Kansas State is all special teams. They're going to have some work to do there.
You mentioned freshman Avery Johnson, quarterback. What was a major win for Kansas State, keeping the local prospect home when a lot of big schools out there, were very interested. Did he get in for spring? And if so, I'm curious how he looked.
He looked really good. In fact, I just saw a video of him earlier this summer running stairs, I think, in summer conditioning, and he is much bigger. He's filled out. He's a special athlete. I think they'll find a way. These redshirt rules are so nice if you want to find a way to get a young guy in there for a little bit. He is a 4-4 type of runner. So we mentioned the Will Howard running aspect. I think we might see them use Avery in that role a little bit. Jake Rubley, another 4-star recruit, is technically the backup as of now, and we'll see how that all plays out. But I got to tell you, this is the best quarterback room I've ever seen at Kansas State, and it's all very young beneath Will Howard, who technically has another season. He has his COVID year, but I don't know if he'll be back or not. But this quarterback room is really good. They've got some really nice talent in it, and they picked up a transfer this summer who's technically a walk-on, but might be able to contribute also.
Tim, I've really enjoyed this. Everybody, obviously, Tim is like poker terms. He's the nuts, right? Go Power Cat is your source for everything Kansas State. I appreciate the time.
No problem, brother. Anytime.